September 4th, and this is the 9 o'clock in the morning session. Okay, good morning, everybody. And let us begin with the homage to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so yesterday we went through the Samatha Sangaha, that is the section in chapter 9 on the whole procedure for developing serenity meditation or samadhi meditation. And now we come to the next section, which is called the Vipassana Sangaha. This is the section on the development of insight. So let us go to the text first. Okay, the text begins by laying out what we might call the framework within which the development of insight meditation takes place. And this framework is a scheme which is used actually as the scaffolding for the Visuddhimagga. It's called the 7 stages of purification. And you can see the 7 purifications. There's a table which shows the 7 purifications on the left, and then the practices that come under each purification on the right. And the system of 7 stages of purification is based on a sutta that occurs in the Majjhima Nikaya. The sutta is number 24. It's called the Discourse on the Relay of Chariots. And in this sutta, it's a conversation between a monk called Puna Mantani Putta and the Venerable Sariputta. And Mantani Putta, in order to illustrate the 7 stages of purification, he uses a simile of King Pasenadi. While living in Savatthi, he wants to go to his other major city, Saketa. And so the way long-distance travel was arranged back in ancient India for the kings, for important people, was to have a relay of chariots set up. So the king would leave the palace, he would mount the first chariot would take him to the second chariot, then by means of the second chariot, he would arrive at the second chariot, then he would mount the second chariot to arrive at the third chariot, and so on, until through the 6th chariot he arrives at the 7th chariot, and then the 7th chariot takes him to the inner palace door in Saketa. And so in the same way it's said that each of these purifications is for the purpose of reaching the next purification. So purification of virtue or good conduct is the basis for purification of mind. Purification of mind, the basis for reaching purification of you, and so on until we come to purification by knowledge and vision of the way, which has as its purpose reaching purification by knowledge and vision, and purification by knowledge and vision is for the sake of reaching Nibbana through non-clinging. Okay, and so actually purification by virtue is really the basis for practice, both in the vehicle of serenity, for undertaking serenity meditation. In order for the practice to succeed, one has to purify one's conduct. If one has distorted or corrupted conduct, bodily and verbal conduct, then one won't be able to succeed in the task of unifying the mind, because the mind will be distracted and disturbed by the thoughts that are coming up through the transgressions of the basic precepts. But here, because the system of 7 purifications is being laid out, so the text brings in purification of virtue as the basis for the unfolding of the whole process of the development of insight knowledge. Okay, so according to the guide to section number 22, we see that the first purification corresponds to the morality aspect of the path. The second purification, purification of mind, corresponds to the concentration aspect, and the other 5 purifications correspond to the wisdom aspect. And the first 6 stages of purification are said to be mundane, not in the sense that they are worldly in the ordinary sense, but they pertain to, we call it the 3 realms of existence. They pertain to conditioned existence. While it's the 7th purification, purification by knowledge and vision, which takes as its objective domain the unconditioned, the world-transcending nibbana. Okay, we will skip over the outline of the different categories that come next and go directly to purification of virtue. And this is explained because, as I mentioned, this chapter is a summary of the Visuddhimagga, and the Visuddhimagga was originally written for monastics, and so it uses a monastic scheme of categories for explaining purification of virtue. So it explains purification of virtue as consisting in the 4 kinds of purified virtue. That is, there's virtue which consists in restraint according to the Patimokkha. The Patimokkha is the code of monastic rules, and so this means observing diligently and scrupulously observing the code of monastic rules. Then, building on this comes virtue that consists in restraint of the sense faculties. And this is to assist purification of mind, what happens when the senses run outwardly and grasp on to the attractive appearance of objects, or latch on to the repulsive aspect of objects, is that the mind gets carried away by attraction and repulsion, longing or desire for the attractive objects and aversion towards the repulsive objects. And so by exercising restraint of the senses, it doesn't mean that one closes off the senses entirely so that one doesn't see or hear anything, but one reins in the mind so that the mind doesn't grasp upon the appearances of things. And so when one is seeing, there's just seeing. When hearing, just hearing, but not seeing, and I want that. Hearing, I like that. Smelling delicious food, I want that. Okay, then virtue consisting in purity of livelihood. This means for a monastic, they're not going out and working at an occupation, at a job, but it means or it refers to the means by which one acquires the means of subsistence, the means by which one maintains one's living, so that one doesn't obtain them by cajoling people. You see, because the monastics are dependent on the generosity of lay people, so one doesn't try to impose on people, cajoling them, flattering them with the hope that they'll make generous offerings to me. Or one doesn't threaten them and say, if you don't give me so much money or such excellent requisites, you're going to be getting a lot of demerit, which will lead you to a bad rebirth. And one doesn't put on a hypocritical display of showing, oh, how lofty and exalted is my conduct, so that people think, oh, he must be a really holy monk. Okay, so in this way, one acquires the basic means of subsistence in an upright, virtuous manner. And then comes the virtue connected with the use of the requisites. And so in monastic life, we speak about the 4 basic requisites. That is the robes, alms food, a dwelling place or shelter, and medicines, medicinal requisites. And so one should be mindful in using each of these requisites for its intended purpose. And so we have like fixed formulas of reflection. So one uses the robe only for the purpose of warding off heat and cold, protecting the body from wind and sunburn, and for covering the body, concealing the private parts. One uses the alms food not to make the body strong and muscular and beautiful, but one uses the alms food in order to maintain life, to keep the body in a healthy condition, and for living the life, the spiritual life. And similarly, one uses the lodging in order to shelter one from the changes in the weather, and one uses the medicines for warding off illness, or for maintaining the body in a healthy condition and for warding off illness. Okay, so this takes care of the virtue consisting in the purification of virtue. And for a lay practitioner, I would say one purifies the virtue by observing carefully and scrupulously the 5 precepts: not to take life, not to steal or misappropriate in any way the belongings of others, to refrain from sexual misconduct, to speak the truth and not to engage in false speech, and to avoid the use of intoxicating substances. Okay, now we come to purification of mind. And here the root text says that purification of mind consists of 2 kinds of concentration, namely access concentration and absorption concentration. And so these are the 2 types of concentration that we dealt with yesterday. And so those are the 2 types of concentration that would normally be developed when one is following the vehicle of serenity. Okay, let us maybe look at the guide, the note in the guide, then I'll elaborate upon this. Okay, the Pali Buddhist tradition recognizes 2 different approaches to the development of insight. One is called the vehicle of calm, or the vehicle of serenity. That's samatha yanika. And this involves the prior development of calm or serenity meditation to the level of access concentration or full absorption as a basis for developing insight. So one who takes this approach, that is the samatha yanika meditator, first attains access concentration, or even goes further to one of the jhanas, the 4 fine material jhanas or the 4 immaterial jhanas. Then he turns to the development of insight by defining the mental and material phenomena occurring in the jhanas and then seeing their conditions, after which he contemplates these factors in terms of the 3 characteristics. Okay, so for this meditator, the prior attainment of access or absorption concentration is considered purification of mind. Okay, the other approach, this is called the vehicle of pure insight. Sometimes it's called simply the vipassana jnana, but here it's called Sutta vipassana jnana for emphasis, doesn't employ the prior development of calm as a foundation for developing insight. Instead, the meditator, after purifying the virtue or morality, enters directly into the mindful contemplation of changing mental and material phenomena in one's own experience. And then as this contemplation gains in strength and precision, the mind becomes naturally concentrated upon the ever-changing stream of experience with a degree of concentration equal to that of access concentration. And so this moment-by-moment fixing of the mind on the material and mental processes in their present immediacy is known as momentary concentration, khanika samadhi. And because it involves a degree of mental stabilization equal to that of access concentration, this momentary concentration is considered purification of mind for the vipassana yanika meditator. That is one who takes the the vehicle of pure insight. Okay, so this meditator is also called a dry insight worker, or maybe let's say dry insight meditator, a sukha vipassika, because he develops insight without the moisture of the jhanas. Okay, so how, now I'll stand up in order to explain more at length. So how is this, in this momentary concentration, how is it developed in the vehicle of pure insight? So it begins somewhat similar to the way a practitioner of a serenity meditation subject would proceed. That is, one needs, before one could focus on the ever stream of mental and material phenomena, one needs what I would call a root meditation object to anchor the mind. One can use the in and out breathing, but there will be a difference in focus from the way one is doing mindfulness of breathing in the vehicle of pure insight from the way it is done in the approach aimed at jhanic concentration. In the vehicle of pure insight, if one is using mindfulness of breathing, one will be distinctly noting the difference between in-breath and out-breath. when one is using anapanasati in order to gain jhanic samadhi, of course one is aware of in-breath and out-breath, but the focus is on the sensation of the breath around the nostrils, and so one is putting the difference between in-breath and out-breath somewhat in the background and focusing the mind on that sensation of the breath around in the area around the nostrils in order to fix the mind one-pointedly in that area in the expectation that over time the nimitta, or the sign, the counterpart sign will arise. If one is doing anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, as a vehicle of insight, one is initially noting the distinction of in and out breathing, clearly demarcating the two. So that is a starting point. In the Burmese tradition of dry insight, I'm not sure who started this, but it's the way it's taught by Mahasi Sayadaw, recommended for yogis. Instead of using the breath at the nostrils, which can be subtle, very subtle, and hard to follow, he suggested using the rise and fall of the abdomen, because it's said to be easier to note. And so in this approach, as one breathes in, the abdomen rises or expands out. And so as one is breathing in, one's attention is based at the abdomen and one is noting rising, rising. As one breathes out, the abdomen contracts and falls, and then one notes falling, falling. And so one begins by noting rising, rising, falling, falling, using this mental note in order to keep the mind on the object. But the mental note should always be somewhat in the background so that the attention is actually on the felt sensation of the rising sensation, the falling sensation. Similarly, if one is doing the in and out breathing, one uses the mental note in, and out, out to keep the attention on the breath. But the mental note is just a background tuning device to keep the mind attuned to the in and out breathing. Okay, as one proceeds with this meditation, when one is, say, I'll take the rising and falling of the abdomen so that I don't have to keep on switching back and forth between the two. So as one is paying attention to the rise and fall of the abdomen, one notices that there's a point at the maximum expansion of the abdomen where there's a brief pause before the falling movement takes place. So to keep the mind fully attuned in the present, one will be noting rising, rising, then the pause, then falling, falling, and then there's a pausing moment, pause, then rising, rising, pause, falling, falling, pause. Okay, now, one who is practicing serenity meditation wants to keep all other thoughts that intrude, whatever emotions arise, whatever distractions arise, to keep them in the background. So if they arise, one just sort of pushes them away or dismisses them and brings the mind back to the object, because the aim is to have the sustained, continuous attention on a single object. But in this vehicle of dry insight, when anything arises in the body or the mind, one clearly and distinctly makes a mental note of it. So as one is sitting, following rise and fall, one will find that the mind has drifted to remembering what happened this morning or last night. So one is remembering. As soon as one becomes aware, one makes the mental note remembering. If one likes the memory, makes the mental note liking. If one is planning what one is going to do tomorrow or this evening, one makes the mental note planning. If maybe some worry or fear arises, what's going to happen tomorrow, one makes the mental note worry, or fear. Or if it's hope about what will happen tomorrow, hoping. So one makes the mental note, and then one brings the mind back to the root object, rising, falling. Then certain bodily phenomena will occur as one is attending. One might experience an itching sensation, and so one will briefly note itching, and then bring the mind back to rising and falling. If the itching is persistent, one might even just focus, temporarily shift the attention to the itching and continue to observe it till it fades away. There might come sometimes a stabbing sensation, a pressure sensation, a throbbing sensation, a stiffening sensation. Whatever sensation arises, one notes it. Stabbing, throbbing, stiffening, pressure. So one notes it a couple of times, then brings the mind back to rising, pause, falling, pause, rising, pause, falling, pause. As one continues to sit for a longer period, pain will arise. So when pain initially arises, one will make the mental notes, pain. If the pain becomes, and this inevitably happens when one is doing like a long retreat, the pain will become very persistent. One could turn away from the rising and falling and just focus on the pain sensation. In fact, in the Vipassana tradition, one could say that the contemplation of pain is, in a sense, the gateway to deeper insight. Because as one goes on observing pain, you see, usually we're afraid of pain and we label the pain as, we take it as one solid block of pain. And when we get that painful sensation and we turn away from it and we want a pleasant sensation. And so when pain arises, the immediate impulse is to change the position so that one gets more comfortable. One thinks, when I'm feeling pain, I can't meditate. But in the Vipassana tradition, when you're feeling pain, that is the key to the meditation. Because you focus in on the pain, and when you really observe it closely, you start to see that what we call pain, which we label with the concept, taking it as a solid block, is actually a series of moments of pain, occasions of pain, which each one is just momentary, arising and passing. And so when you focus very deeply, consistently, intently on pain, particularly the pain in the knees and the buttocks, the legs or the back, then one starts to see the momentary nature of pain. Okay, within this tradition, the sitting periods of sitting meditation alternate with periods of walking meditation. So initially, when one is doing the walking meditation, one will choose an area or an extent, maybe 30 paces long, and one will initially pay attention to right step, left step, right step, left step, paying attention to each step fully as one is taking it, simply keeping the mind anchored in the present on each step. Okay, but as the mindfulness begins to build up and one pays attention to the step, one sees that the step can be divided into different segments. And so initially one might divide the step into 3 segments. I like to use words that begin with P, so it keeps to sustain the mindfulness rather than using different words on different occasions. Then you wonder, what word was I using for that segment? Oh, was it this? Was it that? But I have my 4 Ps, but we start with 3. So we have picking, which is picking the foot up, pushing, which is pushing the foot forward, then putting the foot down. And so now one is seeing how one step actually consists of these three segments, at least three segments. So every step that we're taking every day, whenever we're going any place, you look at people on Broadway, Manhattan, they're rushing back and forth. None of them are aware that they're taking even right step, right step, left step, let alone that they're picking, pushing, putting. Okay, so one could start with the three segments, walking 30 or so paces to the end of the walkway. Then, when one comes to the end of the walkway, one pauses and one notes that stopping, stopping. Then one stands for a couple of seconds, one notes standing, standing. Then one turns around, noting each step in the turning is turning, turning. Then facing the other direction, one stands for a few moments and one notes standing, standing. Then one resumes the walking, picking, pushing, placing, picking, pushing, placing. Okay, so now one is breaking the step into three sections. But if one pays further attention, one could notice that the phase of putting the foot down can be divided into two segments. So we have picking the foot up, pushing the foot forward, putting it down, and then there's a shift in the weight in which the foot that you've just put down is pressing against the ground. So now you have four segments: picking, pushing, putting, pressing. There's ways to subdivide the step into 6 and then into 12. Okay, maybe we'll come to that a little bit later. Okay, so again, to build up this momentary concentration, one has to maintain the mindfulness not only during the formal meditation sessions, but through all the activities. This is difficult to do in day-to-day life when we have various obligations, telephone is ringing, dog is barking, kid has to go to school, or if they're in college, come back, college vacation, you turn on your computer, there's a dozen emails to answer. So difficult to maintain that level of mindfulness in ordinary day-to-day life. So that's why the retreat setting is the ideal venue for developing this degree of mindfulness. So in that situation, one maintains the mindfulness, or tries to, in every activity. So when you go for the meal, standing in line, standing, standing. When your turn comes, holding out the plate, receiving the food, receiving, going to your seat, sitting down, then taking the food, putting in the spoon or chopsticks, lifting to the mouth, putting into the mouth, chewing, feeling the texture of the food, tasting the flavor, tasting. If liking for the food arises, liking. If dislike arises, I don't like turnips. dislike. If boredom, again, these Chinese food dishes, again every day I'm getting the same thing. Boredom. Desire for something different. I want Indian food today. Wishing for something else. Whatever arises, one notes. Okay, so I think from this you get the picture that one is maintaining sustained mindfulness and mindfulness in the present of whatever is occurring in the present. And so in this way, what is taking place is a subtle distinction is starting to emerge between what I would call the world of conceptual elaborations in which we ordinarily live, the realm in which everything is sort of categorized and classified and labeled as with likes and dislikes, with plans, memories, hopes, fears, regrets, nostalgia, all of those sort of those emotions which build up upon this world of conceptual elaboration, a distinction between that and the realm of concrete, actual phenomena, concrete, actual things, material and mental phenomena occurring at the only time that they can occur, which is in the present. So one is bringing the mind away from the future and the past simply by noting what is happening in the present and not thinking of it in terms of, I am feeling this, I am feeling that, I am tasting this, I am tasting that, I am doing this, I am doing that. But rather, this feeling has arisen, this sensation has arisen, this thought has arisen, this state of mind has arisen, this taste is being experienced, this sight is being seen, these sounds are being heard. So all experience is being transformed, or let's say translated, from the realm of conceptualization in which everything is interpreted by way of I, me, mine, into the realm of actual bare phenomena occurring in the present, just material and mental phenomena. And so this is building up towards momentary concentration. It's not yet the real, in bold-face type, momentary concentration. That comes over time. But it's the type of concentration which is now approaching momentary concentration through the sustained cultivation of mindfulness through all activities and through the entire course of experience when sitting and walking in meditation. Now when you look, this is what struck me, when you look at the Visuddhimagga and you see how it explains the development of the next purification of you, it struck me as rather strange, but it doesn't mention like the key to the whole process, which is this methodical, systematic, persistent development of mindfulness. Somehow it's either assumed that the meditator knows that, or it was just an oversight. It just doesn't mention it. And so when we look at that section of the Visuddhimagga, which we'll do in a moment, it seems like it's a purely intellectual method of analysis. But in terms of actual practice, it's not, because it is building upon this cultivation, this continuous and persistent cultivation of mindfulness to the point where mindfulness is present in every aspect, in every activity, in every phase of one's experience. Okay, so let us now move on to the next purification. So as one is cultivating this persistent mindfulness, it's reaching a level of concentration. We could call this the preparatory phase of momentary concentration. Not yet the real or full phase of momentary concentration, but it's sufficient to count as purification of mind, because it's enough to keep the 5 hindrances at bay, to keep them out of range. And even if any of the 5 hindrances should arise, like sensual desire, ill will, drowsiness, restlessness, doubt, one just notes it at once, and so one turns it from a hindrance into an object of meditation. Okay, so now we come to section 30. This is called Purification of View. So here it says, purification of view is the discernment, that's the recognition of mind and matter, or mental and material phenomena, with respect to their characteristics, functions, manifestations, and proximate causes. This, I have to say, seems like too much of a scholastic elaboration, and even I have sort of my testimony of Mahasi Sayadaw to agree with me on this. Yeah, page 147. Yeah, he says, with respect to this distinction of characteristic, function, proximate manifestation, proximate cause, he says, fortunately, it's not necessary to be aware of an object from all aspects at the same time in order to accomplish one's aim. Indeed, understanding an object from a single aspect serves the purpose. And in fact, when I look at the commentaries, the way they explain or distinguish characteristic, function, manifestation, sometimes the distinction between them seems a bit arbitrary. So it's enough, my humble opinion, to focus in on the way the particular phenomena manifests itself, the way it's experienced, and take that as the characteristic. Okay, so let us continue with the guide here. Okay, purification of view is so called because it helps to purify one of the wrong view of a permanent self. This purification is arrived at in the course of meditation by discerning the personality or the individual identity as a compound of mental and material factors which occur interdependently without any controlling self within or behind them. This stage is also called the analytical knowledge of mind and matter. Okay, let's go. Oops. Okay, this is the way purification of view is explained in the Visuddhimagga. And I have to state at the outset that I've simplified this to a great extent. Okay, so it explains the 2 ways to arrive at purity of view, through in the mode of one who takes serenity as the vehicle, and for one who takes insight as the vehicle. Okay, so one who accomplishes this, if his vehicle is serenity, that's the samatha yanika, should emerge from any fine material or immaterial jhana except the base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception. That is the 4th formless meditation, which is so subtle that it's said to be too difficult to distinguish its factors. So one could take anything from the first jhana up to the base of nothingness, the third formless meditation. And then one should discern, according to characteristic, function, and so on, the jhana factors consisting of applied thought and so forth, and the factors associated with them. Then this is my simplification of the complicated explanation. That is, one observes the feeling, the perception, the volition, the consciousness, and any other associated mental factors that are existing within that jhanic attainment. Okay, so when he has done so, then he groups them all together and defines them as nama, as mentality. Okay, then after the meditator has scrutinized or examined that mentality, then he seeks to find out what it is that supports that mentality. And he sees that the mentality of the mind and its functions is supported by the matter of the heart base. This is because in the Abhidhamma, following an old tradition, takes something called the heart base, not the physical heart, but a subtle kind of material phenomena occurring in the region of the heart. It takes that heart base to be the foundation or material support for mind and mental events. Today we say that that's done by the brain, but I think if one really examines closely in meditation where one feels, particularly if one does the loving kindness or the Brahmavihara meditations, where one is experiencing those mental states, for me it's like 100% clear, it's here, not here. I compare the difference. I hope I don't have any neuroscientists in the room. Okay. I compare this to the computer. Okay, the central processing unit of the computer, or let's say all of the data are processed and sort of turned into intelligible data by the central processing unit, which is in the computer itself. But what powers the computer? Let's say I don't have a mainline, a mainline connection, but the computer is running by the battery. So it's the battery that provides the power. If I take out the battery, I might have the most sophisticated central processing unit, or a dozen central processing units in the computer. It can't do nothing without the battery. So it's the battery that's providing the power for the central processing unit to process the data. So we could say the brain is like the central processing unit, but the source of mentality, of the mental functions, is the heart base. Okay, so after that, so he seeks the support for the mentality, and he finds that the mind is supported by the matter of the heart base. So then the heart base is a kind of secondary material phenomena, and it is dependent upon the four primary elements: the earth element, the water, the fire, and the wind element. And so he discerns the four primary elements, which are the support for the heart base, and then he also investigates in the body the other secondary kinds of matter based on the primary elements. So all the matter of the body has color, odor, taste, some kind of nutritive essence, as you can find out if you go. I don't suggest you do it, but imagine jumping into the tiger cage in the zoo, and then you'll find out whether the body has nutritive essence. And then there is the life faculty. So this is the Abhidhamma way of classifying the secondary types of material phenomena. So one brings that all together, the hot base, the primary elements, the secondary kinds of matter, brings it all together as materiality, and after that one defines this all in brief as mentality materiality. Maybe before we come to the dry insight meditator, let us take the break now, because this might take a little time and I don't want to get caught in a break when dealing with this. So we have the break from 10